So the first question is, what is your first memory of using your imagination to create something?
My first memory would probably be when I was 12 or 13. It was probably one of the first extended times where I had my own room, and so I created pretty much like a little fort, a little kind of sort of tent bed sheet over the chair kind of sort of situation, and I would just go up, under there and just pretty much draw, but just be a bunch of like circles, and then I go back and look at the circles and I color them in.
Mm.
And I would do that for every weekend. It was like the weekend thing, but that was my first time like taking a space that was already for me, creating another space within it, and then using that as kind of like a moment to just like do visual art, which I don't think I'd ever done before, which wasn't like linked to like a school project or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. What materials did you have access to at that moment, and did you use?
It was a pretty much a notebook, a lined notebook, markers. What is it, like the little multicolor pack? We got like 8 or 10 in there, various colors, and then pencils.
Yeah. Going back to those shapes and starting to fill them in with color. I mean, you do work with color now, but a lot of it is just black and white. What did color at that moment, like how did that form or bubble up as kind of like the icing on the cake? Like what kind of enjoyment did the coloring part bring that if it's just black and white wasn't yet finished?
Yeah, I think in that scenario, it was seeing all of these kind of sort of, because I'm just circling and Xing and going back and forth, it was like the color is what made it actually come to life. Like once I took that little, I guess it would be like, negative space that's within, the circle lines, now it becomes, or it felt like now I'm making it into something. So it's like the going back and adding the color is creating, is almost making the something out of nothing, because the nothing was just me like going crazy, and then I'm going back and then filling in the color. It's like now it's becoming something, and like the color is what makes it stand out. And thinking, ahead when I started to do this design, it was like, wow, I used to do kind of sort of this, as a kid, but I wasn't kind of sort of trying to make sense of going back and filling anything in. It was just freehand.
That's cool. So talk a little bit about the mindset, how that differs when you are in that first phase where you're just creating the shapes, where you're just doing these circles. How is that mindset different than going back? Are those two different mental states, the first part and the second part?
Well, yeah, I think for me that like first and second was only in like youth, adolescence, like the first time kind of sort of starting to draw, and then, doing bubble letters, doing the little, what is it, 1, 2, 3, check, check, making the S's.
The S, yeah.
Yeah.
How did that like went
that was just
across the
something,
world? I don't understand
exactly,
how that
it
S.
was just, unified. Like, so that type of, whether it was in class, doodling,
Yeah.
And kind of sort of bringing that kind of stuff home, those were my first, attempts. And I think once I started to like evolve, it was really just like mimicking. So like I used to get write up magazines or different magazines and basically try to either duplicate the shoes or the celebrities that I saw. So like Usher, Nelly, Destiny's Child, like when I was like, those were like the, the top pop, with hip hop, R&B, radio stuff. So, I would go to the magazine and then like trace out and then like try to finish it. What was it, like B2K, those, that was what, what was being listened to, and what, as a young like person, what I gravitated towards. I did that, when I was younger, and it was fun and discovery, but I don't think that I ever really nurtured it or really got myself or even shared it enough, maybe with my family or parents to encourage it. And then once I got, I would say, into yeah, high school was all about reading and poetry and writing. And I was, doing newspaper stuff and
Mm.
really fell in love with journalism. And then that took me, into college where I majored in English, minored in mass communications, wanted to be a journalist, and then discovered the concept of intellectual property and thought I wanted to be an attorney. And then post that was like, I don't even remember. I was living in Jackson, Mississippi. So I went to school at Jackson State and was working at Apple at the time, Apple retail store. And I don't even really know. I think I just started to just doodle again. And then this design kind of sort of started to appear. So I like have some sketches of like what the old design looked like. And it was very like blocky and very sharp and edgy. And then it started to just me doing it more through, I would say, it's like 2011 through 2014. And then I moved back to Chicago. And there is when I started to just really just be inspired and look at, okay, how does this come off of the page and then onto things? And then I started with shoes. And then it was like, okay, that makes sense because when I was younger, I used to actually go to magazines to look and try to draw shoes. So the design kind of started as, I would say therapy or release or just kind of sort of being spontaneous. But then I started to your point, look at how does this actually look, when I step back and I see it applied to things. And then you got your friends who are like, yo, that's raw. Like you should, that's, I think that was like the transition, but now it's all kind of sort of, it's free form. It's, I'm definitely trying to get in a place of not looking at it as a thing to monetize or turn into like a commercial avenue for myself. But, I have began to think, in 2018, I actually had a legal, I didn't say thing, but there was a design that looked very similar to mine on a series of Nikes that came out. And my friend saw it and sent it to me, and I was just like, what? That looks like my design. And of course, it's like, doodling and designing is, it's so many people that do it and recreate it. So I'm just like, But then I'm like, I actually did a concept shoot in a studio that Nike uses. It was my first time getting a lawyer. And actually kind of, attempting to protect something that I never really thought about doing anything with. And so I think after 2018, it was like, yo, let's figure out how my art lives and how I can actually be a working paid artist in this way, because so much of my work is in support of artists, whether it's the back end of production or, helping on the communication side. So that was like, okay, now let's see what I can do. And then I think that's where it started to, from 2018 up until 2019, where I did my first art show, where I pretty much just turned my whole apartment into an installation. So it was like IKEA. I drew on some of everything. Everything was for sale. And the idea was to just show it, and it was my first time doing it. And I don't think, had 2018 happened, I may have not had that fire, in me to be like, yo, I can actually.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And then from there, it was like, okay, how do I view myself and see myself, and what things do I want to do or not do? And so it was very, I think like when you're a person who has a lot of interests and you want to do a lot of things, it's very difficult to see how they all come together.
Yeah, totally.
And building a business that could allow myself to also be creative and have my art live up under it. So that's where Not Create came just last year, in quarantine actually. And I think having that, needing to go through a process of a cease and desist and, all that kind of sort of legal stuff really showed me, or kind of sparked in me, like, if, a brand can potentially, snake your stuff or see it as valuable enough to use it, then you should see it as valuable enough.
Yeah. Were there other people in your life or experiences you had as a young person where that was modeled and or like encouraged for you to just let something out? Or was that something that you had to discover for yourself? I'm just curious as to whether artists just knew this all along, that this was a talent, a capacity, a drive that they had? Or was it something that you saw in somebody else and you were like, oh, wow, I think I can do that too?
I would say, yeah, I think a lot of it started for me in sports. And that's like that, seeing someone who puts in the time, puts in the work, and then, can kind of receive an outcome. And so very early on, like I just wanted to play everything in order to, be around, build community, and like win. And so that kind of sort of concept of being a part of a team, being kind of sort of a part of a thing bigger than, myself, was always like consistent. And I never really thought of isolated time or time to yourself. I think from very early on, my mother always encouraged my voice. And so I think the voice of whether you have an opinion or you don't like something, or you want to talk about something, was always there. And I think that carried me into being confident to step into kind of sort of any, whether it was the sports, whether it was my creative practice. But I think for a very long time, because I couldn't, illustrate a portrait or do certain things within my art, I didn't see myself as a visual artist. It didn't really register. And it was actually, I think in maybe 2016, what was it? Someone was saying, oh, your stuff reminds me of Keith Haring. And I was just like, who's Keith Haring? I didn't know who that is. So going through that rabbit hole of, you know, learning about graffiti in the 80s in New York and the Fab Five, and then, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and just all these other kind of sort of artists where I'm like, whoa, they were doing, what is called contemporary, art then. And, of course, there's all these nuances between the celebration of the work, while it was being created, and then, of course, the post, you know, but it just got me to thinking around just the idea of like, how do you use history to inspire yourself? Like, how do you use that as like a model of things are possible? And so, we weren't learning that, in Chicago public schools at the, in the history classes when you talked about, art or history. And so coming back to Chicago in 2014, being engulfed in the scene and just seeing so much performance art, then kind of sort of snowballed me into seeing, visual artists. So, being inspired by them, like folks like Langston Alston, folks like Kayla McCaffey, this renaissance, time of Chicago, and there's so much diversity in it. And so I think that was kind of allowing me space to trust myself and say, okay, you don't have to be this or that, but you're still a visual artist. You still are creative. There's still a creative practice in how you produce things, how you manage things. And I think that was always a part, but it took me kind of sort of discovering it. But, mentors all along the way who were all creative folks very early on. I had an opportunity to meet Common, to meet Amira Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni. And, this is through high school through college, like meeting these actual folks. And of course, it's like more, literary artists and performance artists, but I think they have cover art for their projects. They have merch, for their shows. And so it was really falling in love with all of that, where I was like, yo, these are things that, even if it doesn't involve my physical illustration that is, my art, there's so much other art and creative practice that goes into my work, even merchandising, being able to, have worked for Apple for so long, and being a part of, floor sets, or the change up of, or even just the monumental change, from one color shade of shirt to the next. So like seeing all of that, that's creativity, and it's not something that you can always place a stamp on, or you can't reach out and touch it. But I think that that was me like understanding like all of this has some, sort of fusion. There's a creativity in the how it happens or how you get it done. And I think that that's just allowed me to see the design as an extension of just my own self as a creative. It's, this is just one kind of sort of thing that I've been able to create. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think, yeah, that kind of sort of energy has always been in me, but it took me a while to really figure out, okay, what is it? How do you actually define it and how can you confidently talk about it?
Yeah. I think it's interesting just to notice where creativity, like working at Apple and being like, oh, like there's a space before this is just like the new shirt that is handed out. Like there's a sitting down, there's a conversation either in somebody's mind or between several people to say, why are we going to do this? And that like doing something for the purpose of enacting some sort of change, whether it's commercial change or, you know, social change or anything like that, like that the desire to like move a company or move a people to a new space is a creative act, you know, because from the outside it could just be like, oh, Apple used to wear blue shirts, now they wear red. Like it's like, I guess they like red today. You know, like it's not necessary for everybody to have that conversation, but for those people who are looking for it, like you, to say like, okay, I see that you did that, but like there was a conversation there that you're doing something bigger than that. You mentioned you came up through CPS. And so obviously you grew up in Chicago. What was what was that evolution of like understanding what Chicago held and what didn't hold for you as an individual? And what were those kind of milestones of at a certain age came to a better understanding of your neighborhood or your city or the politicians that then kind of led up to you leaving the city for a while? And like what were you looking for as you first left that you didn't find or didn't find to a sufficient degree here in Chicago?
Yeah, so I I was raised in Chicago, but I moved around a lot. So I have lived in so many places just through childhood. So I've spent the bulk of, I would say, my high school years and childhood years in Chicago. Raised on the South Side, Stateway Garden, housing projects, 35th and State. Lived there until I was about 7 or 8, and then after that, mom got a decent job, moved us to the burbs, which was Elgin, Illinois, and then it was like, but we were hitting the road, every weekend, coming back into the city to hang out, with relatives.
Mhm.
So it was like being in that place of now you've moved away, but you're hopping on the road, driving that 2 hours, coming in, visiting every weekend, and you get to see kind of sort of how people are live as the visitor because you're going, to your mom's friend's house or your relative's house. And then we moved, to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I went to a Christian university. So it was opening me up to religion for the first time. I went there from third through sixth grade, and then we moved to California. And so me living in California was this all year round that you could play sports, this, being in a place where you walk outside to go to the next class, because, that's kind of how the schools are set up. But then, living in California, but being able to like come back to live in Chicago, but then moving to Atlanta. So I will say that for high school, I started and ended at the same school.
Hmm.
But in between that, I went to 3 different schools. And I think that that was probably my first time of really being able to be like, yo, the Chicago public school system is not a service to me. And so one thing that I'll say is I lived in Michigan for a little while as well. And so Michigan, their school system goes on a trimester, and they have kind of a thing of like if you pass the final, you get the credit. And so I started school late in Michigan, but I passed the test, got the credit. Came back to Chicago, and they like were like not trying to honor like my credit, were trying to like make me take the class over, and having, I've been to California. I know I can see how sports are ran and how,
Mm.
there's every sport, and, it's so much kind of sort of emphasis is around trying to help folks get to the next level, kind of in this collegiate pathway. But then coming to Chicago, it's like, if you're not the Whitney Young or
Mm.
the, kind of sort of in a specific section, it's going to be as great as the teacher. It's going to be as
Yeah.
great as the person who is there. And I think I peeped that, sophomore year coming
Mm.
back. I really, I guess, trusted in the guidance counselors. They're like, oh, these schools are giving out scholarships, these,
Mhm.
this, and that. And everything happens the way that it should. Like, life is divine. And I got a full ride scholarship to go to Jackson State.
Mm.
But it was, me discovering like, oh, you have family down here.
Mhm.
You have a whole history. Being able to be in Mississippi and, see a catfish farm or see, it really was kind of crazy because I'm like, I don't know what made me even apply to Jackson
Yeah.
State, but um, it was the free option. It's like, this is where we're going. I don't know anything about
Mm.
Mississippi. Just discovered that I got some family down here, and it was beautiful. Like, they took care of me, and I learned so much just about the roots and the connection. Mississippi to Chicago, and just that long lineage and history that I lived my whole life not knowing that I was a part of, and then
Mm.
now, discovering that. And I think that led me to building my Chicago identity so much, because when you go down there, being from Chicago is a thing. Like, it is a thing to be
Mm.
proud of. It is a
Mm.
thing for people to know. Like, oh, you from
Really?
Chicago? Like, it really is. I ended up, I would say, getting into what I think a lot of just creatives or folks who are in a place of having to overcome just different things in life. But the last couple of years of college were very difficult, just mentally, emotionally. And so, really trying to just figure out my next step. And so, I would say my senior year was like a blur, but
Mm.
I knew that I wasn't ready to go to law school.
Mm.
But I was still thinking I wanted to. But it was always the goal to be back home and figure it out. I don't think I had anything else in my mind. But then it was like coming back to Chicago, and this is a new place. I've been away for
Yeah.
5 years. And now I feel like, not necessarily indebted, but I feel like this is my home. This is where I'm from. It's my responsibility to know what is happening. And it's also my responsibility to be a part of it.
Mhm.
And so that's where, fortunate enough, I was able to transfer my job to a Chicago store.
Mhm.
And that just opened me up to a bigger market. I'm
Mm.
coming from, a little small, mall store, Mississippi store, to a Michigan Ave, Apple
Mm.
store, and, opened it up to so many different things, so
Mhm.
many amazing people, so many amazing creatives who, are either from Chicago or, transplants.
Yeah.
And then that just, that was like the fire of like, I'm where I need to be. But I always felt like the Chicago person that maybe didn't have just this settled place that I could claim,
Mm.
because I lived everywhere, because of, my homelessness. It took me to so many other places
Mm.
temporarily for so much time, where I continued to come back, but I never felt fully settled.
Yeah. Absolutely. For as world expanding as traveling around can be, because you're seeing Michigan, you're seeing California, that search for what home is to an individual. Where is this place that I have roots to? Did any other place feel like home on your stops before coming back to Chicago? Did anything else have little wisps of like, oh, this is what I, or at least would want a home to feel like?
Mm, yeah, I think Chicago always felt like home. It always felt like the place that made me, the place that I was proud to be from. I think for me, where the settlement or the pieces of home and family come in is in like the security. or the comfort of actually having, you know, the four walls, you know,
Yeah.
and you know that kind of sort of where being in Mississippi and meeting my family and seeing how that, you know, Southern hospitality, like that's real. You know, on Sundays we do this or da da, you know, and it was my first time actually seeing that. Or we
Mm,
go to church, we're doing, you know, all of that is laid out in the South. And, you know,
mhm,
there's some things to it that I think can be detrimental, but it's so beautiful to see, like whether it was me being able to just share in space because I was invited in.
mhm,
But I think that that was, you know, the glimpse of like seeing the home, you know, and feeling it and being proud of it and proud to be a part of it, but just knowing like, man, we don't always get this in big cities or was it single parent, you know, homes or like how building up of like practice and ritual is done in really in a really authentic way too. But yeah, I don't think it ever took away from me being like, yo, Chicago's home.
You mentioned the importance of four walls. Can you go into what four walls means to you when you first feel like you experienced that in a way that felt more permanent? Yeah, if that's a metaphor, if that's an actual thing.
Yeah, for me, four walls are just space and time. I think it's the, you know, whether it's carved out or physical or it's just you. And I think for me, for so long, and even now, the bathroom is that for me. And even I think people, right? If you gotta get away for a minute or excuse me or you know you go to you go to the bathroom and you know sometimes you may sit on it, you know, the toilet in the stalls, you may be doing something, you may not. And I think for me, just knowing that my experience has been in sharing space and living with, you know, other folks and not maybe necessarily having a specific space to carve out as my own, you know that once you get into the bathroom, unless you get a knock on the door, it's yours.
Mhm,
You know, that is, it's kind of sort of guaranteed. So that for me has been the four walls of, you know, whether it's to take the moment to, you know, get away for a second, to even now, like starting my day, just, you know, thinking or whatever. But yeah, but thinking more abstractly, it's the option of time and space that is for you and however you can make it. And I think that if we, you know, think about like the importance of having a home or tending to a home, that's key. You need the time and the space. Everyone has their, you know, you have the shared space, you got the, you know, the designated space for this, the designated space for that. And you share time or you work out the time, whether that's, hey, I'm cooking right now, don't come in this kitchen, you know, I'm it's
mhm,
my, you know, I feel like definitely couples do that where it's like I'm cooking, don't come in my kitchen, like,
mhm,
you know, where you possess a space, whether it's you're serious or you're playing,
mm,
um but you possess the space in order to be free to
mhm,
do what it is that you want to do in that space.
yeah,
And that's vital, you know, for a home, whether you're sharing it, you know, sharing it or not.
yeah, mm. Yeah, that experience of having ownership, not necessarily owning a home, but owning the space, having the authority to say, "Not right now," or "Yeah, welcome in." As children, there's obviously this time where you're tethered to an authority, or maybe not, but it's just more baked in. You're growing up. You're growing into becoming that kind of autonomous person. How was your creativity or your art that time? Was that time and space respected from those outside of you, whether it's just close family or just other people? Like, to what extent did you guard time like that, space like that for your creativity, or is that something that you kind of had to grow into learning how to safeguard at least for its own benefit?
Yeah, I think I've been just super blessed. I don't think I've ever had to, you know, safeguard. I think it was just all about the confidence, you know, the confidence and getting over an imposter syndrome or any type of doubt that's gonna you know, keep you stagnant. That was kind of I think my biggest thing. I've always been supported and encouraged, even, from partners. I've been fortunate enough to not have any resistance or folks to say, oh, why you sure? Or do you want, it's always been, the good vibe of, okay, and then, no judgment. So I think I've just been, blessed in that way. But I think being able to have the discipline to know that, you can't be salty if, you don't have any production or what you didn't learn, right? You didn't sit and make the time, to do it. So that's on me. So being able to, whether it's have the difficult conversations with myself or understand what then needs to happen, start a project, finish it, and if you don't want to share your art, don't. But if you don't want to share it, be very intentional or be honest with yourself about why you're saying you don't want to share it. Is it fear? Is it, so I think those are the kind of sort of hurdles or challenges or battles that I've had to do in order to make my art actually something tangible and actually productive. I haven't had to do it so much with, other people. And I think that may not always be the case. So it's good to be thinking about what are my practices. And, I think I'm just starting now because people give me suggestions like, yeah, you should draw on this or you should do this or you should, So I think, it's kind of started. I don't even know if it's safeguard. I think it's, setting expectations or keeping my boundaries or understanding, what is it that I do want to do and what is it that I don't want to do and what is kind of for me to just learn and get good at and not necessarily try to make a dollar, off of it or turn it into, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm excited you brought up those kind of interactions with people. To me, I'm very drawn to people that are exhibiting the freedom to do whatever they want. I'm like, oh, there's so little friction between just what they think is cool and just doing the thing. A lot of art isn't something that I would put up in my house, but there are certain people that are even creating art that I so much respect, just how this just flows out of you, how you're doing it because you want to. And that's so attractive to me. And I think that for me, that's been such a journey, continues to be a journey of like, do I want to draw something because I want to draw in this moment? Or do I want to draw this because it would be a good idea to use this time wisely to be drawing so that I can say I'm productive or that other people can see that I'm not wasting my time? Like to really let it distill down to like, I'm doing this in this moment because it's pleasing to me, because it makes me happy or it's cathartic or anything like that. So especially for someone like you who's multi-talented, talk about how you get in touch with the thing that you actually want to do today. If you have all these options, I could produce music, I could draw on a door, I could write, all of these things. Like you have so many options. What is your practice to kind of let it sink in down to like, this is what I want to do and like go for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, I'm still figuring that out. I'm still figuring out that balance really between work because I do work a lot, and I've kind of sort of come into this place of like I love working. I love working on task and having an agenda and having deadlines and like I love it. Like that is where I feel like most kind of sort of in the doing it. We're doing it. We're getting it. And so now it's like, how do I not look at completing a drawing like that, especially if now it's for sale? So it's like, how do I now, keep the fun in it? And I'm trying to figure that out. I think a lot of times what happens for me, which is kind of crazy, is it's a spurt. I really can't work on one thing at one time. Like I'm all like, it's kind of crazy, but I'm all over the place. Like I may be working on 5 things at one time, but I'll, be working on something, doing something, and then I'll just like draw, doodle on something real quick. So I think I try to allow it to be in the moment, but make sure that it has to happen each day. And the each day is not to push me towards having enough, to sell or creating something that's going to be good to that people will want to purchase, but just to say that I've done it so that I can, like, can I say that I've done the 1,000 hours, the 100,000 hours, or the 10,000 hours or whatever, the suggested amount of time is to be in a professional, perfected, state of something. So I think that is what has been kind of sort of motivating me more recently of, you know, your art is not work. That's for one. Even though it becomes something that, can take you to another place in your career, it can position you in spaces. It's not like your job. And so that is something that I've been very, very intentional about defining. And now that it's defined, it's about, okay, how then do you ensure that you're putting that into practice? And it is not getting up and thinking about work as a thing to do on the list. It's about being able to say, yep, I got some shit to do on the list. I'm going to knock it off. But in between that, while the music is going and the joints are rolled and the joints are smoking, I'm going to be doing a little something here and there. And then I'm going to continue to put myself in a place of how do I ideate concepts. So yeah, it's really making a commitment to do it every day, but making sure that every day does not include kind of sort of the structured, do this thing. But it happens in the moment and it's organic and it's as long as I want it to. Like sometimes like I'm working on these flower pots, but I'll do something like, I'm working on something and then I'll come like this. This isn't complete. But I just did a little bit.
And you stopped.
And I stopped. Yeah. But I did it. And so it's like, how do I, be proud of myself for that and keep it going?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a personal journey. Like what work looks like to you, what work does not look like to you. And that is like a personal journey that it is so tempting to be like from, somebody who wants to start doing that, be like, how do I replicate that? And be like, well, really I can just tell you what feels best to me. But there's no guarantees that will feel good to you at all. That may feel terrible to you. And I think giving yourself that permission to say what feels good to me is the best way is, I don't know. I don't know if I heard that around me a lot. Talk about a little bit about what the flow state feels like to you and when you have exited out of that and are like, if something is starting to become work, how does that feel within you? How do you feel about the work that you're doing versus when you are just creating and you're not too in your head? Like, what are those two states? Like, how do you start to learn over time that, oh, maybe I even wasn't conscious of it, but I'm like treating this like work? Like what things come up for you that you are able now more to identify like, oh, I'm working and I want to step back, or I want to at least be mindful that this is work now. I thought it was just purely creative, but I want to treat it like work. Like what are those differentiating factors?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's just, is it my own, like I'm actually creating something or I am creating something for other people? And that's been because so much of my work is in creative management. It is bringing my creative self, my ideas, but it has nothing to do with my artwork. My artwork is not a part of that. So I think for me, that has been the beginning kind of sort of way of like, did you physically create something custom that is a part of this project? And if the answer is no, then it's permission to treat it like work. If it goes on that to-do list, it's going with the same concept of trying to make something a task and then knock that task down. So I have a list over there that's just household stuff that I have to do, which is good for me in my practice to make sure that I get it done. But I can't make sure you draw on 5 flower pots. And that's something that I would do. A month ago, I would do that. or maybe even, a couple weeks ago, like I would do that. And it's just like, no. But it's like, okay, then, well, then how do you get it done?
Yeah.
And then it's like, it's not about getting it done. If it's about getting it done, then you're taking that same, that's the mentality you take when you take on a project.
That's so interesting.
It's
at so fine. No,
yeah, I think that's,
yeah.
At least for my brain, like that can't be the case or the scenario unless I've been commissioned, right? Then it's like, oh, this is a project or a task that has a deadline and, it has maybe some directive, but even still, it's not me kind of sort of stepping in to supporting someone else's vision, somebody else's idea. And I think for me, where I have to learn, it's not in, how do I not pivot towards the work? It's like, how do I keep kind of sort of the work not in too much creativity, because I think for me, like, I'm like, all right, I'm ready, like ideas off the wall, but like willing those in to be like, so much of your creative self doesn't need to show up right now. There's a specific task or a specific thing and a structure that you have to fit yourself into. So I think for me, it's this duality, because sometimes you will get put into a project where you're like, well, what do you think? Or what do you think should happen? Then it's like, okay, am I creating a whole treatment? Am I doing a whole, but it's like understanding the boundaries within actual creative project. But then on the flip side, understanding how to not pull my, creative practice into this same kind of sort of method, which I'm learning as we are speaking how to do that. But I know what has been my thing in the middle is that I will just stop. I'll stop and lay in the bed for like 10 minutes, or I'll stop and smoke a joint, or so I think I have certain things where I will, if I'm too overwhelmed or it's too much task or it's too many things. Another thing is I write notes to myself, one step at a time, get it done. So just different little affirmations around the house as well, to just remind myself of, as much as your work is in being of service and work of others, there's time that needs to be carved out for your own self and for your own creative practice to grow it, to evolve, to get better. But in that same breath, creating a structure that is similar to your work and attaching that to your art is not going to allow you to do the things that you want to do with your art. It's only going to put you in a place of turning your art into a business. And if that is not your goal, and if that is not your intention, then what are the new practices? And so I'm developing those now. And it may mean saying no to some projects. It may mean creating blocks of time where I may just say, let's just create and do something. I started this a couple years ago. It was with a friend of mine, Toaster. He's an artist, graphic artist, writer, all kinds of things, producer. We were doing these creative kikis where it was like, just come create. We did a couple at my crib. We did a couple at his, but it was like, we just invite folks, bring whatever of your choice, your, kind of thing that jumpstarts your creativity. And we're just going to play music and create. And if you want to share out what you're creating, you can. If not, no worries. But we're going to come here 2 hours at a time and you just work. So it was, kind of sort of creating a, shared workspace. But the idea is that you were coming here to be and share space with folks who were going to be, doing the same thing, working on something. And those were cool. But I think that could happen too, whether if it's just with a close homie, one person, where I'm allowing myself, designated time. But again, it's not trying to fit into this same structure that I apply my work practice.
Yeah. Well, specifically with your, do you call it doodling?
I would just say it's like an illustrated pattern.
Illustrated pattern. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about those patterns, specifically why they're meaningful to you? Like, when do you decide that that's important art to make. It also sounds like doing 3 minutes of that kind of like sets you into a mindset that is a good reminder of something. What is the importance of that, and how did it come about? Yeah.
I mean, I really just go. I think, as I was saying, like beginning, the shapes were, very hard and like blocky. And then just over time, I don't know, maybe my mental state became more relaxed. That's the only thing I can think about in just where I was in my life when I started to do it versus, once it began to change and evolve. I was in a more relaxed place. I was in a happier state in my life. And it just seemed to be consistent. It seemed to be the consistent loops, the ends. My name is Nicole, but I do like ends a lot. Discovering Basquiat and knowing that he had the crown, but just doing a W, so that came through seeing Basquiat's work. I really got into mazes and thinking about maze art, and then learning that like mazes are technically, like, of course we have mazes like the puzzle books and stuff, but like technically, like digital mazing is like kind of sort of like forbidden, because maze theory is the same thing that they use to like code and create security systems. So I was like, wow, that's so interesting. Like, so on the back end, all these security systems are essentially just digital mazes, that you, I guess, can't hack or whatever, but it's not really a practice for people to create maze art. It's just kind of sort of, like I said, a puzzle book. So I started thinking like, wow, like these are cool. And so I started looking at those a lot. So I would say maybe those two things are the inspirations, like just what I discovered around, maze art and mazes, and then just the writing. Like, I'm a writer. I spent so much time writing for therapy, journaling, and then writing for, creativity and performance art, that now I was kind of sort of creating lettering that isn't lettering, so I had so many different folks say what they think it looks like or how it kind of sort of appears to them. And some people have said it looks like a language and looks, like I said, like Keith Haring and things like that. But I think for me, it was really just unlocking something and then being like, dang, I keep drawing it like this. Like I keep drawing it like this, and I'm getting quicker. It's getting quicker now. I'm putting it on things. And the putting it on things is what is now kind of sort of bringing it into life in people's minds. So seeing it on a shoe. The next thing was a jacket I did for a friend, and then the next step, of course, was putting it on furniture and then selling that and making it a whole experience. Yeah. So I think all just by maybe divine energy, where, at some point my mind just unlocked or relaxed enough to create something consistently in the same way and really give myself the time to do it. And then allowing myself to share it, and then that allowing me to like build my confidence to then take it into these other places, whether it's on the coffee table or, on the pair of shoes or whatever. And it's all, stream of conscious, it's almost like, a freestyle. And what makes it, I think, cool for me is how I can take so long to finish something. I'll start, let it sit, and then I'll come back and just, pop in where I left off. Yeah, it's fascinating even to myself. I don't really know at what point did I create, I guess my own pattern, art, or illustration, but I know now that I'm like, let's keep it going. Let's figure out where it can show up. Let's, figure out how this becomes an extension or branding to your business and not just something that you're slapping on stuff and selling.
I mean, I think it's so cool what you said of, it's fascinating even to me, like to take that sort of pleasure, that level of surprise in what comes out of you. You're almost observing yourself, and you are yourself. Like, it's like, oh wow, like this is a multi-dimensional. To admire something that came out of yourself, I think is like that's such a fun experience. It's not, because then it's not just for somebody else. Like, if they like it, that's great. But like, first this was for me, and then if I want to have it be for you, that I can choose to do that. So, well, I want to thank you for sharing, and I love your stuff. It's makes me very happy and excited and energized and inspired to kind of continue to express what I'm excited to express. And so it's fun to like meet somebody else who is not only doing something that I admire, but doing something that I feel a resonance with, of like, oh, like that level of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I am excited to give that to myself as well. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for hitting me up and reaching out.
Thank you. It's great to meet you.
Peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.